Hello and welcome to Mobile World Live's continued coverage of Fyuz 2022 here from Madrid. Joining us in our event studio is Jeff Wang from Accenture. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here, Jeff.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, we're talking a lot, obviously, about Open RAN and about various pillars in the industry and how they're responding to that, what they're doing with that, and what's next. But my question to you really is, how ready do you think the industry is for Open RAN?
It's a great question. You know, initially we used to look at Open RAN as a necessity from a TCO perspective, but I think the industry's evolved past that narrative, and now we're looking at it from a narrative around what other type of benefits and value can we build off of that. I mean, just look at this Fyuz conference. When you look at this in general, it starts with an Open RAN conversation, it moves to a disaggregated network conversation, and then it builds on what types of solutions, innovation can you actually put on top of that, like a metaverse conversation. And I think that's where we're actually pushing and loving to see where the industry's going, that this isn't just about a security conversation that requires technology at a cost structure that makes sense. Of course, that's incredibly important. But now we're actually thinking about what are all the benefits as we look at that value chain and we think about how are the equipment providers now participating in creating supplier diversity? How are the actual operators trying to actually create a new identity off of this network and this modern network? And how do we think about the industry improving society? What are all those things? And I think those are the key important parts to this.
It's much more than just a technology conversation. I mean, you mentioned in the benefits piece there about how, you know, from an operator's point of view, there's going to be lots of different types of benefits in terms of optionality, in terms of choice. We were talking yesterday about efficiency and sustainability, which is another big conversation. That's technology on the one hand, but what about the people side? How do we ensure that from a people part of this conversation, they are also as ready as they can be?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point to think through, that it's not necessarily just about, is the technology ready? This is an entirely new way of doing business when you think about this. And before, it was a very clear value chain of a really integrated hardware and software piece of equipment coming in, the network being deployed out, and then someone running it to provide value. And now we're looking at this as what types of new processes need to be created when you've got multiple people working together, multiple groups working together that might have been competitors before. Yeah. How do you deal with kind of this entire upskilling situation where the workforce now has to change? And it doesn't mean the traditional network engineers. It could be potentially postgraduates, it could be new job seekers, it could be folks that want to get into the network industry, as well as, of course, the existing network engineers. And you find these kind of merging of new skill sets where traditionally you needed just network skills, but now you need network skills, you need IT skills, you need software development skills, you need all of these new skills. And that's one of the really things that we find interesting and one of the big challenges. So if you kind of look at kind of the bigger challenges, what we're up against, it's complexity to an extent, and how do we simplify that complexity? It's cost structure, and how do we make sure the economics work? It is the technology ready? And are we at a point where we can kind of move forward with confidence? What types of upskilling and talent can we do to actually drive that in these new processes?
But this is far more, though, isn't it, Jeff, than just a technology conversation, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple big components to think about, or a few big components to think about. I think the first one is really when you have a disaggregated open architecture, there's groups that haven't worked together before, and they need to actually learn how to work together. And that's one of the big ones around figuring out the new processes that need to be put in place, the new operating models we need to be thinking about. I think the second other one is, what are the accelerants that we need to put in place? Again, beyond the technology part, what are ways that we can actually integrate this faster? What are different ways that we can test and validate this faster? I mean, if you even look at that piece of it, what happens when one provider actually makes a change in their software? How does that affect everybody else that it's involved, and how do you deal with that regression? So really, how do you integrate faster, and how do you test, and how do you validate faster? And I think the final big component of it is really kind of this training aspect and this upskilling aspect. When you look at kind of originally, it was network engineers that loved what they did, but now we're not only moving to a new generation of what the network looks like, but also what are the new capabilities that are required? So now you're bringing in more cloud skills, you're bringing in more IT skills, you're bringing in more software development skills. And it's good for everybody because it's building new capabilities, but it does require this new training, this new upskilling component.
a lot of new skills required in order to fill the gaps on this, as the industry progresses on this Open RAN journey. Skills, one thing that are required, and we'll touch on that in just a moment. Collaboration is absolutely the other thing that's going to be necessary, isn't it?
It's almost one of the most important parts to this is really collaboration. When you have all these new groups working together that are really not necessarily familiar, sometimes competing with each other in the past, how do we all think about actually putting the greater good out in front and actually creating this environment or culture of collaboration so we're used to it?
Thank you very much indeed for now, Jeff. Let's continue the conversation, particularly around the skills part there. And joining us in the studio also is Pedro Jeronimo. Pedro, good to meet you. Tell me about the TIP Academy. And particularly the Open RAN courses that are being hosted there.
Yeah, thanks for that. So the journey with TIP Academy started over a year and a half ago. Working with TIP, we identified an opportunity to develop talent. We actually screened the members of TIP to understand what actually was missing. And with TIP, we actually identified that over 90% of the members thought that there was something missing from a training and upskilling perspective. Leading next to 75% actually thought that within that testing and deployment was specific areas that were missing from an Open RAN perspective that could enable and accelerate the Open RAN adoption by the industry. So that led to the TIP Academy. That Accenture has then brought in multiple members to collaborate and develop content. Is an online, self-paced, vendor-neutral, industry-led learning platform. We have now different levels of certification, starting from associate to professional expert and then architect. And over now 60 hours of training content available. And already landed 5 chartered accountants with Vodafone, Deutsche Telecom, Orange, Meta and Accenture, obviously.
What's the response been so far to those courses on TIP Academy, and where do you see this building to next? Because clearly there's a lot of change. You've got the training there, but there's still a lot that it seems to me it's still developing, still growing, still unknown potentially.
Yeah, and that's actually what we're finding out because this is developed with the community around TIP, led by Accenture as a neutral party. We're finding out that elements like test and validation need to be further, co-creation and co-development in terms of content. We need to do a lot more around plan and design, orchestration, automation, so on and so forth, which will then eventually lead to other curriculums beyond Open RAN. And the fact that we already have these 5 organizations, obviously with people going through the courses, proves that obviously there is commitment, and more importantly, there is collaboration amongst everyone to develop the content and then consume the content.
And then in terms of accessibility, as I understand it, TIP Academy is open to businesses at the moment, but we were talking just a second ago with Jeff about the opening the doors, really, trying to get as many people skilled up, excited, engaged with the Open RAN journey as possible. So are there any plans to open up the TIP Academy platform?
Yeah, indeed. So next year, we're going to go into B2C. So we're going to open up to all the consumers. We already have a number of organizations helping us through that journey. Obviously, from B2B, not just, by the way, the corporate world, but also looking at universities. To continue to develop new talent. So it's not just about the reskill and the upskill, it's also about the net skill, so the new talent that we need to develop in order to then obviously help with the deployment of Open RAN. And B2C is now the next one and is launched next week, next month. There is a proof of concept. Obviously, we're going to learn a lot through that. And I'm sure we're going to continue to scale the platform through that.
Exciting times. Listen, Pedro, thank you very much indeed for joining us here today in the Mobile World Live studio here at Fyuz 2022.
Thank you very much.